Haze is arguably the most broken endgame character to play in Deadlock, and I always see people play her wrong. Whether it's building the wrong items or not playing to their role, those mistakes can be the difference between winning and losing on a character that is a late game carry. With the right build, you should be able to walk up to anyone mid to late game, hold in mouse 1, and watch their health go to 0, which is exactly what this build does. Not to mention, most games you play with this build, you're going to have the most healing through lifesteal, the most objective damage, player damage, highest farm, and overall be one of the most impactful players in the lobby. I'm going to hop straight into the build that I currently use to dominate with Haze, but before I do, if you guys do find the build useful, make sure to support the channel in some way with a like or a sub, and I do also stream Deadlock over on my Twitch, which you guys can find in the links down below. Okay, first things first, if you guys just want immediate access to the build, obviously you can do this by hitting B in the sandbox area or even in a live game. Go to the public section, and then all you have to do is search G miners. You can click on the build and use it. You can hard it if you want it to be under your favorite section right here. I'd recommend doing this. I don't think a lot of the default public builds are always the best to use. That said, I definitely do not build this out left to right, one item by one item by one item. There's obviously optional sections, situational sections for different items. So I would highly recommend following the video along to understand how I build this out as I progress through the game and I'm earning more and more souls. As soon as you start the game, the first thing you're going to want to do is obviously build out the starting section, which has 4 items. All these have 500 souls, so that's going to be the first 2,000 souls that you get. In total, we have high velocity magazine, we have basic magazine, extra stamina, and then extra regen. I do want to note that I build these in a completely random order depending on the game that I'm playing. If the people I'm leaning against are really aggressive, I'll tend to go with extra regen first just to stay alive with higher health so that I can sit there and farm for a longer period of time and prevent needing to go back if I can. Otherwise, if people aren't super aggressive in my lane, I'll just build out the weapon items first. That way I can get high velocity mag, basic magazine, things like that. And then I almost always go with extra stamina last because all this really does is allow us to get out of situations where the enemy is diving. And we really shouldn't be in those situations until people start to gank our lane. Just going through the items in a bit more detail, high velocity mag is great for the bullet velocity. Every weapon in this game, to my knowledge, has some form of bullet travel time, so this makes it feel a lot more like a hit scan weapon on top of the 18% increase in damage that we're getting. With basic magazine, we get a 24% increase in our ammo, which is great, especially for Haze's weapon, because it fires quickly and has a pretty low base mag size. Plus, we get 21% additional damage, which is, to my knowledge, the largest damage increase you can get out of any of these starting weapon items for only 500 souls that isn't conditional or doesn't only apply for NPCs. Extra stamina, we literally just have for extra stamina, so we can move around the map quicker and have additional stamina charges for the dodge jumps if we need them. And then lastly, extra regen is also just here for extra health regen, a little bit of bonus health, and a percentage increase to our base health as well. Moving along to the early game, this is always going to be the 5th weapon that you're going to be buying, which is bullet lifesteal. All 4 of these items are also just going to be $12.50, which is relatively cheap. You want bullet lifesteal next just to also help keep you alive, which is great across the entirety of the game because we get 28% bullet lifesteal, which is honestly a lot. This is also going to help you farm camps. Like I said, it'll allow you to start being a little bit more aggressive in lane. And then we're also going to be pairing this with active reload, which should always be the 6th item you get. With this, we have a portion of our reload on an 18-second cooldown that allows us to press R again. And if you do that correctly, you instantly reload your mag for a 20% fire rate increase and then some additional bullet lifesteal at 20%, which is going to last you 7 seconds. So when you do this, you can easily turn on somebody. Again, it's going to allow you to farm camps out a lot quicker. These are 2 items that are going to last and be extremely useful throughout the entirety of the game. So they are absolutely crucial to the build. At this point, I see a lot of people make mistakes with Haze, which is that they tend to go straight for Tesla bullets, which do not scale very well, especially when you get to the end game. I highly, highly recommend never building this item. I have it in the build just in case people are fanatics for it and they really want to build it. What I highly recommend is just saving an additional 3,200 souls and going straight for Ricochet. With Ricochet, this deals 60% additional ricochet damage, which means if I'm shooting an enemy, the bullet that hits the initial enemy will deal 100% damage. It'll ricochet to a first enemy, dealing 60% to that enemy, and then a second enemy, which also takes 60%. So if I hit a camp of 3 enemies and I'm shooting one of the little frogs in the face for 100 damage, the other 2 frogs nearby are going to also take 60 damage, which allows you to clear camps incredibly fast. We also get a ton of additional damage, we get a ton of additional fire rate, and a bunch of additional ammo here, which is also really nice because towards the late game, we don't have to prioritize building something like Titanic Mag and wasting a slot if we don't need to. At this point, what you're going to notice, if we build everything out, our first 7 items are going to fill up all of our weapon item slots that we have access to. So depending on how your game is going, if you guys are super ahead, if you're super behind, really ultimately what matters is how many flex slots you have access to. That's going to dictate how you build things out. Obviously, we have a lot of our spirit slots free. We have an additional vitality slot free. We can also start selling some of our tier 1 items if we need to, but I want people to keep in mind how I'm going to build this out is under the optimal condition that I always have the flex slots that I need when I need them as I progress in the game. So if you don't have those flex slots, you're probably going to want to start building in a different order or really prioritize going and getting those flex slots so that you can build the next item you want. At this point with Ricochet, you tend to be a little bit weak because you're a little bit behind, maybe neutral or even with other people in the game. But after you quickly get souls with Ricochet to build the next 1 or 2 items, you're going to start to really feel ahead and really melt through people's health. The next item that I like to build is either Burst Fire or Intensifying Magazine. I know I have Intensifying down here in Endgame. I just put it down here because I think it's broken and it's something that is one of the crucial main items for increasing your damage. You could build these in any order. It doesn't really tend to matter. What I like to do is probably go Intensifying so that I can fight, and then I'll build Burst Fire. But if I don't have this flex slot with Burst Fire, what I'll do is probably sell something like High Velocity Mag. So keep in mind, these are very important. At this point, I'm assuming most teams, even if you're behind, have all 4 of the main Guardians dead. So you'll at least have 1 flex slot here to play with. Going over Burst Fire and why this is crucial for the build, we get a ton of additional fire rate. We get a 12% increase in fire rate just all the time, but then more importantly, whenever we hit an enemy hero for the first time within an 8.5 second cooldown, we get a 4-second duration of increased move speed and most importantly, fire rate. This is great for engaging in other enemies. 30% increased fire rate is insane when it comes to increasing your DPS, so this is amazing. This also pairs really, really well with Intensifying Mag. This gives us additional ammo and a ton of additional damage, so at this point with these 2 items, we can start melting health bars. But the way that Intensifying Magazine works is that it increases your damage over time between 0 and 3 seconds of continuous firing, up to a 75% weapon increase, which is pretty massive. As you're going to see here, my weapon damage is over on the left-hand bottom section of my screen at 125%. As I keep firing, not even landing hits, you're going to see that it's rapidly increasing up to 200%. As you can also see, our baseline is 125. So when I reload, it just slowly starts going down. So you get that increase in damage for a while. It doesn't just last until you stop continuously firing. It slowly falls off. Because it's really cheap, I tend to build Bullet Resist Shredder next if I can. I can always build it, but it just depends on how many flex slots you have available. So assuming these 2 are locked, Bullet Resist Shredder is going to help a ton. Suppressor is also great if you want it. The only reason I would say to avoid this in games is if you're not going against somebody with a high fire rate, where the fire rate slow is going to have a massive effect. An Ivy or a Wraith are your 2 main suspects if you are going against them. If they're on the enemy team's roster, I do highly recommend picking this up. If they're not, I would say you don't really need it, and instead you could probably go for something like Quicksilver Reload if you wanted that, because it is nice to use the turn on somebody. At this point, I'll also aim to start building Leech, but again, this is going to be determined on how many flex slots I have. Obviously, we can socket Leech right down in here and fill out our Vitality slots. Leech is great because we get an additional 35% bullet lifesteal on top of the 28% that we're getting from bullet lifesteal itself. So these are going to combine and be extremely useful to help keep us alive. The only downside here in my eyes is if you haven't built something like Lucky Shot quite yet, you're going to be missing out on a lot of damage. And if your damage isn't insanely high, it's really not going to feel like Leech is all that effective. At this point, if I do have the flex slot, I will just go with Lucky Shot instead of actually going with Leech. I tend to build Lucky and then Leech. However, I'll always build Leech first if I don't have these flex slots unlocked, because you might as well just stay alive in fights. The thing that Lucky Shot is going to be really, really good for is just a baseline increase in your overall damage. This increases bullet damage by 90%. It also applies a movement slow, which is great. The bullet damage being 90% sounds insane, but there's only a 35% chance to proc. The way that I just kind of do the math in my head, 35 is roughly 33%. So we'll just say 1 in 3 bullets on average is going to be proccing this, which is a 90% damage increase. So overall, I would say this is a 30% flat increase in damage on top of the 18% that we get from any max tier weapon item. So you get a ton of additional damage just for free with this. You get movement slow, and you also get a ton of additional ammo. After getting Lucky Shot and Leech, making sure I have Intensifying and Burst Fire, the absolute last thing that I'm going to build is Glass Cannon. The only time I'd ever build Glass Cannon early is if my team is absolutely behind and I just want to go for kind of a Hail Mary where I can just start owning. With this, we get a 70% increase in our weapon damage, an increase in our fire rate, our movement speed, but the main penalty is a pretty large decrease in our health pool. We get minus 15% health. The other really good conditional thing about this is if we do end up going on a streak, up to 7 kills, each kill gives us a 10% increase in our damage. So we can go from a 70% weapon increase all the way up to a 140% weapon damage increase, which is insane. The other nice part about this, if you read, death results in the loss of 1 stack. That is absolutely broken. If you go and kill an entire enemy team, get +6 stacks, and then somehow you die at the end of the fight, you're still sitting at 5 stacks. I think it's kind of broken. I feel like they should remove all your stacks upon death, but for the time being, you can abuse this. And at this point, you have a ton of additional damage to deal towards enemies. The very last items that I tend to build are going to be Superior Duration, which I build onto Bullet Dance, and then also Superior Cooldown, which I also build here. At this point, you're pretty much at the very end of the game. A lot of other people will try and build something like Unstoppable or Silencer and things like that so that your ult is really, really beneficial. I think your ult is strong, but it's very easy for people to get out of the way of your ultimate when you use it. You also have, obviously, not that much movement speed while you're ulting and things like that. People can easily get outside of this radius, even if you build extended reach and things like that. So for that reason, I think it's much better to just focus on going invis, running around, sleeping somebody, and then just absolutely annihilating their health bar. That is the entire build. A lot of the optional and situational items I think are pretty self-explanatory. If you're laning against the Bebop, something like Reactive Barrier is going to be great. Likewise, if you're against the Pocket that's super strong, Debuff Remover is also going to be amazing. The last thing that I did want to mention is that this is a late game carry build. If a game goes late and you farmed well, even if you ended up losing your lane, you have little to no kills at the time, you should still be easily the top farm in the game. If your team is doing well, chances are you probably are going to end the game before ever getting fully built, and the same goes to your team getting heavily beaten. This build also isn't going to feel good if you just dive an entire enemy team and expect to instantly melt people. If you solo dive 6 players, you're going to get CC'd and owned pretty quickly, so the best thing to do is just play around your team and go for kills on players who aren't aware of your presence. Genuinely my favorite build so far in the time that I've played Deadlock. If you guys do like this build, please let me know in the comments down below. Let me know who else you want builds for, and I am by no means a pro, so if you have recommendations for the build or any other build, also let me know that too. Peace.